On the morning of Friday, June 26, 2020, as rain began to fall across Greater Manchester, armed officers took position outside a row of quiet terraced houses. For months, detectives had followed the movement of millions of pounds in drugs and dozens of military-grade firearms through the hands of men who believed their network was invisible. That morning, the illusion was about to break. Within minutes, one of Britain's most sophisticated organized crime groups would begin to unravel. This is the story of two separate criminal empires, one built on encrypted technology, the other on family trust, and the investigations that expose the hidden networks feeding Britain's drug and firearms trade. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries rooted in verified facts and real investigative work, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's step into the hidden world these men created and the long, methodical pursuit that brought them down. By early 2020, organized crime in Britain had evolved far beyond the street corner dealer or the lone trafficker. What law enforcement faced was something closer to multinational logistics operations, complete with hierarchies, supply chains, encrypted communication systems, and financial structures designed to launder millions. At the center of one such enterprise was Omar Malik, a man who preferred silence to spectacle. From an apartment in Manchester's city centre, Malik oversaw the wholesale movement of cocaine, MDMA and amphetamine across Britain, shipments that reached London, Birmingham, Scotland and Ireland. What began as a local operation evolved into one of the most sophisticated organised crime groups the region had ever seen. Malik's network relied on EncroChat, a secure communication platform marketed to legitimate businesses but widely adopted by criminals across Europe. Each member of the group used their own encrypted handset and operated under an alias, moving through a closed digital world where real names were never spoken. To the outside observer, these men led ordinary lives. They drove expensive cars, owned property, and presented themselves as entrepreneurs. But behind the facade, they were managing a criminal enterprise worth tens of millions of pounds annually. Malik operated under the handle PayerBills, directing where drugs and firearms should move. Adrian Gonzalez, using the alias TerryTibs, managed the stash house at Anacot's Marina, a luxury development on Manchester's canals that hid its darker purpose. Inside, police would later find cocaine, MDMA, ammunition, and hundreds of thousands in cash, all vacuum-packed and ready for transport. Connor Sandlin, known online as Stelboat, handled couriering, moving drugs and cash across the country in vehicles that blended seamlessly into motorway traffic. Daniel Gibbons, with the alias HumbleWaffle, was trusted with logistics. He had even created a front company, Global Trades UK Limited, to disguise weapon imports as legitimate business transactions. Daniel Waters, or Obscure Twig, began as a courier, but expanded his role, recruiting others to keep deliveries flowing smoothly. Andrew Cooney, under the handle Fern Pirate, acted as dealer and broker, connecting criminal clients nationwide. Sean Hogan, using Dull Hyena, was both buyer and distributor, handling cocaine and purchasing weapons from within the group. Together, they built a structure that mirrored corporate hierarchy, with Malik as director, Gonzalez as operations manager, and the others fulfilling defined logistical roles. Their wealth reflected their reach. Porsches lined driveways. £600,000 in cash was seized in one search alone. Paperwork would later link Cooney to an Italian villa used for laundering profits. Investigators would uncover evidence that the group had acquired lethal military-grade firearms, Scorpion submachine guns, Grand Power handguns, sold onward to other gangs across Britain and Ireland. In short, it was a network running quietly beneath Britain's streets, invisible to the public, until one encrypted message gave detectives their way in. To understand how that breakthrough occurred, we need to step back to early March 2020. Working quietly from offices in France and the Netherlands, cybercrime investigators breached the servers of EncroChat, the encrypted communication platform used by tens of thousands of criminals across Europe. The platform had been considered impenetrable. Its phones used multiple layers of encryption, self-destruct features, and servers located in jurisdictions with limited law enforcement cooperation. But through a combination of technical expertise and international coordination, Authorities managed to install a software implant that intercepted messages before they were encrypted. With this development, law enforcement suddenly had access to millions of hidden messages, real-time conversations between drug traffickers, money launderers, arms dealers, and contract killers. That intelligence was passed to Britain's National Crime Agency, forming the backbone of Operation Venetic, the largest and most significant law enforcement operation in UK history. In Greater Manchester, the data was filtered down to the Serious Organised Crime Group, who opened their own strand of the investigation as Operation Glassy. Their task was to identify the people behind the usernames, a process that required weeks of digital cross-referencing and manual detective work. Each alias had to be painstakingly linked to a real person through location data, photographs, financial records, and phone cell site analysis. It was slow, methodical work, but the evidence it produced was overwhelming. The tone inside the messages was routine, almost casual. Guns, ammunition, and cocaine were treated like stock on an order sheet. Conversations ran day and night, and the language they used revealed a criminal system operating with chilling efficiency. One message read, 10 ready there with 300 sweets. The 10 referred to firearms, usually Scorpion submachine guns. Sweets meant bullets. Another exchange captured the mindset behind the trade. As we go to war, at least we got heat. To the men involved, these weren't coded threats. They were business terms. Prices were set like wholesale rates. Scorpion machine pistols sold between £9,000 and £15,000, while Grand Power handguns fetched between £5,000 and £8,500. One message exchange hinted at wider connections, discussions about shipments moving up north, and weapons destined for lads in Ireland. Others referenced wars in Scotland, later linked to violent disputes involving rival organised crime groups in Glasgow and Belfast. Detective Inspector Danny Young, one of the firearms experts reviewing the data, later described it plainly. This was the highest level of firearm trafficking I've ever seen. With this initial and vital information, police started surveillance operations. Between May and June 2020, physical observation confirmed what the digital messages had already suggested. The group was operating on an industrial scale, trafficking drugs and firearms across the country. In one discovery, detectives found a digital ledger showing 739 kilograms of cocaine supplied between January and May 2020, valued at approximately £25 million wholesale, or roughly 70 million on the street. Investigators catalogued at least 52 Scorpion submachine guns and 49 Grand Power pistols, military-grade weapons sold to other gangs. Greater Manchester Police worked hand-in-hand with the National Crime Agency's Firearms Threat Centre and the Crown Prosecution Service's Complex Casework Unit. Together they mapped the movements of each suspect, where they met, who they called, how the drugs and weapons were passed along the chain. By early June, the picture was complete. The digital trail matched the physical evidence: cash movements, vehicles, stash houses, courier runs, all aligned perfectly with the encrypted messages. At this point, detectives knew they were ready to strike. The encrypted empire that once felt untouchable was already beginning to fracture. On the morning of April 22, 2020, a routine vehicle stop in West Yorkshire became the first visible crack in that empire. Inside the car, officers found a loaded Grand Power 9mm handgun, ammunition, and a large quantity of cash. The driver claimed it was a misunderstanding, a borrowed car, no knowledge of what was inside. But when his phone was seized, detectives knew they had touched something bigger. The device was an EncroChat handset, one of the same encrypted models already under live surveillance by Operation Venetic. It revealed the driver's identity as Connor Sandlin, the courier known online as Stelboat. His arrest triggered a chain reaction that began to unravel the entire organization. Within hours, word reached Adrian Gonzalez. He messaged Omar Malik to warn him that one of their men had been arrested with firearms. A few moments later, another message followed. "Switching this off, bro." Then came the question that revealed their fear. Feds can't get in them, can they? The men were right to be nervous. By that point, investigators were already reading every exchange in real time. As panic spread, members of the group began moving money, phones, and weapons. Surveillance logs recorded couriers rushing between addresses, emptying stash houses, burning evidence. £300,000 in cash disappeared overnight as they tried to erase the trail that now clearly pointed back to them. At the Anacots Marina stash house, watchers saw boxes being loaded into cars and driven off within minutes. Inside one of those boxes, detectives later found traces of ammunition, a sign the guns had recently been moved. The encrypted system they once trusted had become a trap. Every move they made to hide, every message they sent to stay ahead, only put detectives one step further in front. By the time the panic subsided, police had everything they needed. What came next wasn't a warning. It was the takedown. In the early hours of June 14th, teams moved in across Greater Manchester in one of the largest coordinated takedowns the force had ever conducted. At St. Mary's Parsonage in the city centre, officers entered a luxury apartment linked to Omar Malik. Inside, they found him calm but resigned, his EncroChat handset tucked beneath a sofa cushion. Nearby lay £15,000 in cash and a collection of gold jewellery. The man once thought untouchable was now under arrest. A day later, on June 15th, tactical units hit addresses in Reddish. Daniel Gibbons and Daniel Waters were intercepted, carrying large holdalls as they attempted to leave a flat. Inside, officers discovered 2 Scorpion submachine guns, 2 handguns, and 1,098 rounds of live ammunition. Alongside the weapons sat £616,000 in cash, several kilograms of drugs and amphetamines hidden in a freezer. Documents seized from the same address detailed Global Trades UK Limited, the front company Gibbons had created to disguise weapon imports. That same night, Adrian Gonzalez was arrested while leaving his city centre apartment. His EncroChat device was found concealed beneath artificial grass on the roof terrace, wrapped to avoid detection. Over the following week, detectives closed in on the remaining members. On June 25th, Sean Hogan was arrested in Denton with a taser, cash and a quarter kilogram of cocaine. Later that day, Andrew Cooney was detained in Audley Edge. His property contained luxury watches, paperwork for 2 Porsches, a quarter kilogram of cocaine, and documents linking him to an Italian villa used for laundering profits. Each arrest confirmed what the digital trail had already shown. The empire that had taken years to build had fallen in a matter of days, but the courtroom would reveal just how deep its influence had run. The courtroom phase began months later at Minshall Street Crown Court in Manchester. It lasted 6 weeks, a detailed examination of the evidence already covered. The prosecution, led by John Elvidge KC and Neil Fryman, described the organization as a well-run company, one that had turned the sale of drugs and firearms into a full-scale business model. Only one defendant took the stand. Andrew Cooney insisted that an unknown passenger must have been using his car and his phone. The jury dismissed the claim without hesitation. The mountain of evidence, digital, financial, and physical, left no space for doubt. Judge Bernadette Baxter described their messages as chilling in their normality, adding that the group had operated as colleagues in a business, not criminals in a conspiracy. Outside court, senior officers from the National Crime Agency and Greater Manchester Police called it a once-in-a-career operation. When the verdicts were read, the hierarchy of the operation became clear. Omar Malik, the ringleader, received a sentence of 38 years. Connor Sandlin was jailed for 30 years and 5 months. Daniel Gibbons received 28 years. Daniel Waters was sentenced to 26 years and 5 months. Andrew Cooney was given 27 years. Sean Hogan was sentenced to 24 years. Adrian Gonzalez received 25 years. In total, the network faced almost 199 years in prison, one of the longest combined sentences delivered under Operation Venetic. The men who thought their encrypted world made them invisible were finally unmasked. But before Manchester's empire ever began to fall, another network, quieter but just as profitable, was already thriving further north. This one didn't rely on digital codes or encrypted phones. It ran on trust, family, and routine. At its center was Abid Hussain, a 28-year-old from Rochdale who supplied heroin, cocaine, and crack cocaine across Lancashire, Greater Manchester, and Yorkshire. To those around him, he appeared calm and organized, the kind of man who treated the trade like a business. But behind this reality was a steady supply line that generated millions of pounds in profit. Working alongside him was his partner, Mariam Akhtar, age 31, who helped move money and coordinate deliveries. She was involved in counting, packaging, and transporting cash to buyers across the north. Hussein's uncle, Yasar Mahmoud, 46, worked as a courier, using his taxi to run drugs and collect payments, blending criminal work with his day job. The network stretched wider than anyone realized. Ibrar Ashraf, 32, a dealer from Blackburn, was one of Hussein's main customers, collecting up to 1 kilogram of cocaine every week. In Newton Heath, Liam Collins, 38, distributed drugs on Hussein's behalf, supplying local dealers who fed Manchester's streets. Further afield, Oveis Bailey and Mahindra Hoko from Leeds acted as smaller-scale buyers, funneling Hussein's product into West Yorkshire. The group operated from a modest flat on Meadowcroft Lane in Rochdale, a property that looked unremarkable from the outside, but functioned as a production base for Class A drugs. Despite the low-profile location, the money that moved through it told a different story. Hussein and Akhtar spent lavishly, including a 3-night stay at London's Shangri-La Hotel and a shopping spree at Harrods worth thousands of pounds, just weeks before the police raid. Their spending habits revealed how profitable the network had become. From a small Rochdale flat, the pair had built a quiet empire, one that looked stable, organized, and untouchable. But behind the walls, detectives were already watching, and their operation was about to get a name. By May 2016, detectives in Lancashire Constabulary's Serious Crime Unit had begun to notice a pattern. A steady flow of cocaine was moving through East Lancashire. Consistent quantities were being collected and paid for with the same precision every week. The activity centered around Ibrar Ashraf. To understand the scale of what they were seeing, officers launched Operation Kellington, an investigation designed to trace the supply line from street level back to its source. Early intelligence pointed to Ashraf's weekly collection of 1 kilogram of cocaine, often delivered in person and always paid for in cash. As surveillance expanded, phone analysis revealed a link between Ashraf and a number registered in Rochdale. The line belonged to Abid Hussein. From that moment, Hussein became the focal point of the operation. Investigators soon identified his partner, Mariam Akhtar, and his uncle, Yasar Mahmoud, whose taxi routes repeatedly aligned with the movements of known dealers. For weeks, plainclothes teams monitored Mahmoud's journeys between Rochdale, Blackburn, and Newton Heath, watching him deliver bags to addresses that were later confirmed as drop-off points. What began as local surveillance quickly grew into a cross-border operation coordinated with Greater Manchester Police. Together, the forces mapped a clear picture of the network's structure and reach. The flow of cash and drugs moved predictably between the same towns, showing that this was not opportunistic dealing. It was a full-scale supply route. Financial checks added another layer to the case. Despite their modest base in Rochdale, Hussein and Akhtar's spending far exceeded their reported income. By mid-August, detectives had what they needed: the contacts, the vehicles, the routes, and the money trail. The courier chain was fully mapped. All that remained was to move in. Monday, 15th of August, 2016. It was just after midday when surveillance officers watched Yasar Mahmoud leave the flat, carrying a dark sports bag. Within minutes, Mahmoud's taxi was pulled over by police. Inside the bag were 116 grams of crack cocaine, 81.9 grams of cocaine, and 371 grams of heroin, drugs with a combined street value of around £40,000. Mahmoud was arrested on the spot. The discovery gave detectives exactly what they needed. As officers secured the scene, another team prepared to enter the Meadowcroft Lane flat. What followed was the culmination of Operation Kellington. Months of coordination, surveillance, and intelligence work, now converging on a single address. Inside, almost every room contained evidence of large-scale production. Kitchen counters held scales, cutting agents, and bagging materials. In the bedrooms, drawers were filled with cash bundles and plastic wraps of heroin and cocaine. In one corner of the living room, officers found a cash counting machine still plugged in. By the time the search was complete, The figures stunned even experienced detectives. The team recovered 23 kilograms of Class A drugs, a mixture of heroin, cocaine, and crack cocaine, with a total estimated street value of £3 million. Alongside it, they found £164,000 in cash, some still sealed in vacuum packs. The equipment inside showed a level of organization more akin to a commercial production site than a street operation. Detectives later described it as one of the largest seizures ever made in Rochdale. What followed next would take the story from the streets to the courtroom, where the hierarchy of Hussein's empire was laid bare. The hearings took place at Preston Crown Court in August 2017, just a year after detectives raided the flat on Meadowcroft Lane. For prosecutors, the evidence presented to court was overwhelming. Most defendants entered early guilty pleas. When passing sentence, the judge described the enterprise as one that relied on consistency and secrecy rather than violence or visibility. He noted that the organization had generated substantial profit before police intervention finally cut its reach short. Detective Inspector John Roy, speaking after the case, said, "This operation shows we are committed to tackling cross-border criminality and dismantling the supply lines that harm our communities." Abid Hussein, identified as the organizer and supplier, was sentenced to 16.5 years in prison for conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. His partner, Mariam Akhtar, admitted assisting in the operation and received 3.5 years. Hussein's uncle, Yassar Mahmoud, was jailed for 9 years. Ibrar Ashraf received 9 years, while Liam Collins, operating from Newton Heath, was sentenced to 4 years. Further down the chain, Ovais Bailey and Mahindra Hoko were both given 6-month suspended sentences and ordered to complete 80 hours of unpaid work. In total, the defendants received more than 40 years of imprisonment. The sentences reflected not just the scale of the operation, but the methodical nature of the investigation that brought it to light. What links these two cases, separated by geography, by technology, by scale, is the quiet persistence of British law enforcement in dismantling criminal infrastructure. The Manchester EncroChat network represented the cutting edge of organized crime. Encrypted, digital, insulated from traditional surveillance. The Rochdale operation represented something older, rooted in family ties and physical logistics. Yet both fell to the same principle: patient, methodical detective work that built a case piece by piece until the structure could no longer stand. Operation Venetic, the national operation that exposed the EncroChat network, would go on to result in over 800 arrests across the UK, the seizure of millions in cash, tons of drugs, and hundreds of firearms. It represented a watershed moment in the fight against organized crime, proving that even the most sophisticated encryption could be breached when international law enforcement coordinated effectively. The Rochdale case, by contrast, showed that traditional methods, surveillance, financial analysis, informant intelligence, remained powerful tools when applied with discipline and focus. Together, these investigations revealed the hidden economy that operates beneath Britain's surface. A multi-billion-pound trade in narcotics and weapons that feeds addiction, fuels violence, and corrupts communities. The men involved saw themselves as businessmen, and in many ways, they were. They managed supply chains, negotiated prices, diversified product lines, and reinvested profits. But their business model depended on human suffering, and the justice system's response reflected that reality. The combined sentences, nearly 240 years of imprisonment, sent a clear message. The law may be slow, but it is thorough, and it does not forget. In the years since these cases concluded, both the technology and the tactics of organized crime have continued to evolve. New encrypted platforms have emerged to replace EncroChat. New networks have formed to fill the vacuum left by those dismantled. But the investigations continue, carried out by officers who understand that this is not a war that will be won with a single raid or a single court case. It is a long, patient effort to disrupt, dismantle, and deter, knowing that every network broken, every shipment intercepted, every firearm seized represents lives saved and communities protected. The legacy of these cases lies not just in the sentences handed down, but in the investigative blueprint they established. The combination of technological innovation, cross-border cooperation, and old-fashioned detective work that remains the most effective response to modern organized crime. And so the work continues, in cities and towns across Britain, carried out by teams whose names will never be known, but whose impact will be felt for years to come. These are the stories that rarely make headlines, but that shape the hidden landscape of British crime and justice. The Real Crime documentary, unfolding every day behind closed doors and encrypted screens in courtrooms and evidence rooms, in the quiet determination of those who refuse to let the criminals win.